In higher ed, we're all looking for big wins, but reducing a 75% application abandonment rate and achieving a 90% conversion rate, that's next level transformation. Michael Battersworth, CMO at Texas State Technical College, shares how they achieved this by streamlining the application process with Element 451.
Our Element journey began out of a necessity. We were switching to a new SIS, and the application process was going to pose some real usability issues for us. We felt that application was going to hamper our enrollment. So we began quickly to evaluate different CRMs, different applications. So for context on that, our conversion rate with the prior application had about 75% abandonment of people clicking apply to submit. And the first weeks after going live with Element, we saw an 80% conversion, and that's now up to 90. So improving the usability of that application on the front-end process has had a significant advance in our intake.
When technology works for students, it works for you. Visit element451.com to see how simplifying the application process with artificial intelligence will lead to significant results for your institution. Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I have been looking forward to this conversation, and I appreciate you also just setting this up for us quickly. I have seen you coming across my feeds more and more, so I feel like that's sometimes like the universe sort of telling me like, oh, I need to have a good conversation with this person if it's just sort of, bumping into each other virtually or whatever else. But just appreciate you, Chris, for jumping on for this episode, talking about a lot of stuff of really, your interesting background. I was looking over, kind of getting that in detail and all the cool stuff you do, but also talking about the upcoming eduWeb Summit. It's coming up very soon. So kick us off, just give a brief introduction and then kind of focus in on your current role. Then we'll go from there.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, Dustin. I have been listening to the show for a long time, and you and I had an opportunity to meet in person at the NAGAP conference in 2024. And it's always great to be able to talk shop and be able to talk about all things higher ed and the geekdom. I always look at your background and I'm like, oh, you and I have a lot in common. So yeah. I really appreciate the opportunities. As you said, my name is Chris Lewis. I'm the Director of Graduate Programs at the University of Michigan Flint. Most of my experience has been working with graduate students over the scope of my career. But I've also worked in community colleges. I've worked at four-year comprehensives. And I think that for me, a lot of my background also has, coincidentally, I'll say, also been at many different institutions that have an access mission, which I have come to really appreciate and love. And that includes the work that I'm doing today at the University of Michigan Flint. And over the years, I have really stepped into digital marketing and digital blogging, podcasting, lots of different ways, not only in my professional work, but personally, I've been doing a lot of work with that. And a lot of that started personally with a site that I started as a dad back in 2007. And it grew from there. So, a lot of self-teaching, understanding social media platforms, understanding the power of storytelling. And then as I started learning more and more about that in my personal life, bringing that into the work that I was doing in higher education to engage with current students, prospective students, and more, to allow for me to be able to reach even further and beyond the scope of the the educational university that I was at. So it's really been kind of interesting as a way to be able to blend both the personal and professional lives and be able to reach further.
Well, and something that resonates with me is like that you were nurturing certain skills in terms of like content creation, storytelling, and everything. Personally, because I've always like kind of sought out excuses to kind of justify like playing with new tools and different things, and even just like, podcasting in general always was sort of like starting as this like, kind of like side passion project and everything always kind of was kind of deeply integrated with the work that I do or the things that I care about and all that. But yeah, sometimes like it is where things will kind of like veer off or sort of like converge again and intersect of like, doing podcasting or, any type of content creation, social media, community building, all that, like keeping those skills kind of fresh and current and, just having that muscle memory, I think is so important. And, just trying to seek out those opportunities to get your hands dirty with them, or at least just like be aware of like, what are other folks doing in the space, or, what are the tools out there? Thankfully for me, like and I think for both of us really, like doing this for as long as we have, so many of the tools have evolved so much to like make it easier and make it better. And so like talk a bit about your podcast, any kind of context, I guess, about, just what they are, what they're about, and how they came to be or anything. But just feel free to shout out everything that you're working on right now.
Well, let me give you a little bit of history, and then I'll talk about the current podcasts that I am working on, and I've got about 5 different ones that I'm working on right now. But when I first started podcasting back in 2013, there was a show called Dad Spotlight. It's no longer out there. It pod faded, we'll say, that it went away after about 5 years of being out there, and that was about fatherhood. Had a co-host, and we ended up closing that down after a bit. But then while I was working on that, that was the first time when I took the jump into talking to my own employer. I was working at a law school at the time. And what I was finding when you talked about the fact of merging the two and finding ways to find that intersection, sometimes you have to be that advocate and go out and be able to educate others on the power of podcasting, because that's what I had to do at this law school, because the law school had been doing a lot of traditional media, a lot of evergreen content. They had done blogs, they had done, the social media posts, and they were on a number of different places on social media platforms. However, they were not doing podcasting. And one of the things that I said was, one of the things that you are not doing, you're using TV, you're using all these other mediums, but you're not using podcasting. And at the time, this was around 2016, I said, podcasting is exploding and more people are listening to podcasts. And you have an opportunity here to be able to start having a conversation and situating this institution, this university, as a leader in the niche area that we're going to talk about. And it took a little bit of time to convince them to do it because they weren't sold at first. They didn't know enough about it. I had to educate them about what podcasting was and why we should be doing this and what the benefit would be. What we ended up creating for the university was a podcast called The Law School Insider. And the concept of this was that we would invite individuals that were connected to that law school. They would have been alums, they would be a faculty, they would be staff, and we would specifically talk about those things that students that are going to law school would need to understand, would need to work toward to be able to be successful in that 1L year. And then beyond the 1L year. And I was the host of the show. I ended up creating and editing and doing all of the work on it. And we ended up with about 110 episodes before I left the institution. And those episodes are still out there. They've continued to pay for it to be hosted. They continue to see traffic. They're continuing to get people that are connecting with the content. and it's been very successful for them. Transition to today, and that it was a few years back that I left that institution, but transition to today. Back in 2022, I started a similar podcast here at the University of Michigan Flint called Victors in Grad School. I'm the director of graduate programs at the University of Michigan Flint. My role is to work with prospective graduate students, current graduate students, and I wanted to create something that would allow for us to be able to talk to individuals about, again, success in grad school. When I looked across other shows that were out there were many shows that had niche areas about going to med school, going to law school, going to other types of programs. But I didn't really see a lot of people just talking about grad school success in general. So, created this show. We have about 160 episodes already. And in those episodes, every episode it's probably 20 to 30 minutes long. We talk to individuals that are connected to our institution in some way. So they either graduated here with a bachelor's degree and went off somewhere else. They came to us from another institution to get a graduate degree, or they got a bachelor's degree here and then continued on to get a graduate degree. I also talk to faculty, I talk to staff. And again, we're giving the listener tools for their toolbox to help them to find success in the journey, because it is a journey. So, similar concept, but again, situating the institution as an expert in using story and storytelling to do just that. So, those are two of the higher ed focused podcasts that specifically I've done. I've also got another fatherhood podcast that I do now called the Dad and Daughter Connection. That was on the heels of another show that I did called Dads with Daughters. I have another podcast that I produce for NASPA, which is a higher education association. And I started that podcast called SA for Student Affairs, SA, Voices from the Field. And I have a couple of other ones. I've sat on a school board. And I have a podcast for the school board. I have another one for a local church. So I love podcasting. I think there's a lot of power in podcasting and a lot of ways to be able to aid people in a lot of different ways. But that's kind of been the journey. And as I said, right now I've got 5 different podcasts that I do, but I'm definitely really passionate in higher ed about that storytelling piece and allowing for people to be able to learn, to grow, and to be able to make informed decisions based on those stories as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll stick with this for a minute, just about the eduWeb Summit, because I know that your session is kind of on this, and I think, having the kind of case study of like those 2 institutional podcasts that you did, and I think it's really great. I appreciate you kind of going into the whole kind of story there, and like, to me, what stands out and what's been, sort of the finer point on what I was talking about of sort of like, you find these excuses, nurture skills and all that. It's like, they are skills that you can make of service, to employers, to organizations that you volunteer with and work with and whatever else. And, so that like there can be those really tangible benefits and sort of like marketing yourself and sort of, what you have to offer. But, and I heard this like years ago, and I think we're seeing it really continue to play out, is that like podcasting is the new blogging. Like blogging is almost just like, well, that's like a core fundamental, almost like required part if you're trying to exist and promote yourself, and do kind of digital marketing. You got a blog, and now sort of like podcasting is something where it's like, oh, if you do it, you can like really, find some really great benefits from it. And I think, they both kind of share the similarities of like, you can get started pretty easily. And it is just that idea of like, people want to hear from other people about their stories and, advice and, thoughts on things. So it just kind of is that like idea of us being, social animals. Like we just crave these sort of things, especially, when we're trying to, maybe make a big decision, work through a problem, or, want to kind of normalize what we're going through and everything. So appreciate your commitment to the craft and doing across the board and all these different sort of spaces and places and everything. But so like I said, you're presenting at the upcoming eduWeb Summit on podcasting, it as a tool to leverage in ways kind of with kind of what you had described, certainly, institutionally and others. But if you want to kind of expand on that, sort of like what things you could tease about the session in particular. But for both of us, the first time being at this event, so I know we're just excited in general to be in that at that event. Just curious what you're kind of looking forward to.
I'm really excited about the chance to connect with colleagues who are pushing the boundaries of how we engage students digitally and to learn from them as well. In higher education, a lot of times we move carefully and things move slowly, but I love the fact that eduWeb brings together people who are innovating boldly. And I'm looking forward to conversations about personalization and storytelling and using data creatively to meet our students where they are. Because a lot of times it's a rare space where both strategy and creativity get equal weight. And I always love being able to come away with not just ideas, but real actionable steps that I can bring back to my campus. And I know that this summit is going to do just that. What I'm going to be speaking about, I am excited to be able to talk about what I've learned. I've got a short window of time to be able to convey not only what we learned, but also give some tools for the people attending's toolbox, to give them some thoughts and things, to give them some reality checks as well, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to do podcasting, but I want people to have a realistic view of what it means to podcast and also what it doesn't mean. Because as you and I both know, podcasting takes a lot of time, effort, and resources to be able to continue and to maintain. And you have to have that buy-in from your own campus to be able to do it, but you also have to have the passion for the topic at hand and have enough, I'm going to say, staying power to be able to go the distance and to continue it, unless you're going to do a short run podcast with a certain number of episodes on a specific topic, which is perfectly fine. However, you just need to realize what you need to realize. And a lot of times until you get into it, people don't always understand what goes into the whole production side, not just the recording of the interview, but the production side of making a quality podcast that people are going to want to listen to. And I'm hoping to be able to share that too. But I think there are so many stories that our institutions, our programs, our people at our campuses can share that can aid not only current students, but prospective students, staff, faculty, across the board. And if you look at the higher education landscape, there are many examples of how people are using podcasting in different ways. Many of them are very niche in specific areas, but there's a lot of ways that you can share your own voice, but also share the voice of others if you so choose, because you could decide you're going to just do a single podcast or a solo podcast with just you speaking and you providing that expertise to your listeners. A lot of my podcasts do bring other voices in, and I am the facilitator of the conversation. Not that I don't have expertise. I mean, I do have expertise in areas, but I like having that conversation like we're having today. So I think all of that in mind, I'm really looking forward to the eduWeb Summit because it's going to be people with like-minded approaches coming together to be able to learn from one another and to be able to then leave the summit with tangible things that they can bring back to their own campus and implement for the betterment of their universities, but also the betterment of the students.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's one, I have not been able to go to, this being the first year. I've been like anticipating this for a long time. Like I've been eyeing it as one of the kind of elusive events that I've been wanting to go to. And they're making space for like a session like this because I think, it's something that I just always love talking with folks about. And I think, even with limited time, like everything that you kind of mentioned, to be able to like list them off like clearly and succinctly of like, here's what you need to think about if you're thinking about doing a podcast, like for your institution, for yourself, whatever else. Because like, yeah, all those things, it's like, it's not as if you're just being like, here's like all the exact steps. And if you do it, you're going to like it's like, yeah, you could do it yourself. You could do just a, short run, like limited series kind of thing, post every week, every month or whatever, but like, yeah, just all this stuff is like, if you think about this, if you go in with intentionality, just the appropriate level of preparation, because I think people want to rush into it, and yeah, they're maybe overly focused on like the hardware and the recording experience and whatever else, and it's like that is obviously important to be planning for, but yeah, there's so many other sort of like strategic pieces, and just glad that you'll be there sort of waving that flag of just being like, hey, like podcasting is great, this is why, here are the things that you need to be thinking about, and then like let's keep the conversation going, because it's like often like people like hopefully through like what you're doing get over like the initial hump, and then if they like start getting into it, then they're gonna be like, wait, hold on, so I used this tool, like it did this, like any advice about like, is this the best thing to use for this, whatever I'm trying to do. Starting with that kind of strategic outlining and kind of at least folks hopefully like making connections with like folks like yourself or maybe other people that are in attendance or something on like some of the tactical pieces. Because like, yeah, again, across the board, like there's no one right only way, to do any of this kind of stuff. So I think it's always good to have folks that you can kind of check over your shoulder to like troubleshoot stuff or, to see like, how folks are doing this. So, definitely excited for that as well. Your session, and then whether you're fully remote or partially, like, I think that's just always like, for me, it's just always a treat to be in community with other folks who are doing similar work. So for me, like, it's like, I'll always like do at least, a good chunk of my time of sessions, but like if sometimes I have to sacrifice that for like, hanging out, chatting with folks, I do that kind of stuff, like setting up those sort of meetings or going out to like a happy hour or something like that. It's like, that is like time well spent for me, a lot to look forward to. And I think there's also like an AI studio, so just even having that sort of space to really, if you want to kind of zero in on that, I think is really cool to see. So yeah, we'll have links, for folks to check out the event in the description for the episode. But all of this is sort of like riding this wave of our conversation here to sort of like, you're in a position where obviously all this kind of stuff we're talking about with like content creation, storytelling, and all that is one of the impactful tools that folks like yourself can do to, recruit students, retain them, just that they have like success stories to, take inspiration from or, feel more a sense of community and all that. So like, if you want to kind of keep talking about that more so zeroed in on the day-to-day of your current role or just other stuff that you want to kind of give honorable mention to here, but like, what are some of the current trends and challenges and things that you're grappling with day to day right now in your role?
I think there's a lot of challenges right now as we go into, my role tends to be a lot in enrollment management. So that being said, I'm looking at the pipeline in and through our institution. And I work very collaboratively with our Office of Undergraduate Admissions, as well as our Office of Graduate Programs, and then all of the other enrollment management areas, financial aid and registrar. And, we are at a point right now where we have this demographic cliff that all of us are watching and are feeling in many different ways. Our undergraduate admissions areas are definitely already hitting it, and we know that from the graduate perspective, on the graduate end, that we are going to feel it in the next few years. So it's being strategic and trying to better understand, okay, how is that going to impact us? What are we going to be having to do to be able to stay ahead of the curve, ahead of the wave, to be able to know and have some concept of what we should be doing now to prepare for that point in time. But beyond that, we're also at a pivotal time in higher education where a lot of things are being thrown at universities, when it comes to things regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and how that's impacting students and the decisions that are being made at our institutions. We have to do whatever we can to support our students and show that we are able to continue to support our students and be able to keep up the good fight in regard to allowing our students to feel that they have a voice, but also that they have places to be seen, to be heard, and to be able to be who they are. And I think that that's a continual challenge. And we have to follow the what's happening on our own campus and the decisions that are being made on our own campuses. But at the same time, we have to try to stay on top of all of the changes, all of the things that are changing from a federal lens, from a state lens, from wherever else. And it is definitely challenging. And I think on top of that, when we're talking about podcasting and marketing and social media, this space so much is changing. And with AI is constantly changing. There are ways to incorporate AI into the work if you do have a podcast, but just in the work that we're doing in higher education, we need to be able to stay on top of the changes and understand not only how we want to use AI in the work that we do, but also how students are using AI or not using AI, and be able to have a clearer understanding of how that's going to impact the work that we're doing, but also how we're interacting with our students and how we need to support the students in the future. From an enrollment management lens, I look at it and I have to understand that some students may be using AI for some of the things that we've asked them to do to be able to be considered for admission. What are we going to do about that? What are we allowing students to use AI for some pieces, but not other pieces? Do we have policies in place that will guide students and guide the institution? These are all questions that all of our campuses are grappling with right now. I can't say that I have all the answers, but I will say that it is constantly something that we're having to deal with and having to come up with answers for as we move forward.
Yeah, I guess like the through line for me with what you're saying, it's like it's just the constant juggling and the kind of battle of like not getting lost in the noise, but still just being aware of what's going on. Like, I think that's like, because you want to be like, oh my God, things are changing so quickly. So yeah, maybe you don't need to be like so lost in the minutia of, it can be just so stressful and you get burnt out, just like, keeping up with all the like breaking news alerts constantly and trying to like, do all that. So I think, yeah, it's trying to find that right balance and adapting where necessary. So I think, yeah, it is just an interesting environment. And I think that idea of trying to find that right balance of keeping aware but not getting kind of lost in it, it is the idea of like, there is a lot that is, certainly on like the AI front that's like kind of disrupting, the policies, like you said, of just like, okay, how do we do, like, that's like a very like kind of meaningful kind of thing. But then sometimes it's just like, oh, it's just the way the wind's blowing, like that's going to pass or whatever, of just sort of like weird, all the like administrative kind of, stuff from like the federal government and everything like that. It's like, I think that's part of like the whiplash part of it, of just being like, oh, they put something in, it's taken away, and all, but it's like, okay, that's just like a weather front that is coming through. Like, that's maybe like that discernment and how maybe you leverage podcasts or community or whatever, like folks that you could like look to try to understand and like, kind of sift through everything, I think is part of the solution here. But as we wrap up, I get, I'm kind of tee you up here. What is your advice, given all of this and, all that we've talked about and everything, advice for other higher ed leaders that are navigating this moment right now? What would you tell folks?
I think we are definitely at a pivotal time in higher education, and my advice is really to stay student-centered, but be unapologetically adaptive, because we can't cling to how we've always done things. Students are telling us what they need, and it's up to us to really listen and respond. That might mean rethinking traditional marketing, investing in new tech, or even reimagining our internal structures. For me, collaboration across departments and an openness to experimentation are key. And if you lead with empathy, transparency, and a willingness to evolve, you'll not just survive this moment, but you're going to come out stronger in the end.
That is wonderful advice, because I think whatever is sort of temperamental or sort of, transient about this moment is not just going to be like, oh, it's going to be different tomorrow. I'm sure it'll just all go away. I'll wake up. This is like a bad dream or whatever. It's like, yeah, you've got to figure out how are we going to endure. And I think, a great way to put it of just being like keeping that North Star of like student centeredness, that always being a way that you can kind of shake out how you're going to make decisions about doing something or not doing something else. I appreciate you sharing that and all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and everything you work on in the description for the episode, and as well as ways to check out the eduWeb Summit. So hopefully we'll see folks there. But thanks so much, Chris, for hanging out and for all that you do and the content creation space and everything else. But just really appreciated having this chance to chat.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to chat with you today.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.